Students, what's something your teacher did that really triggered the whole class? Story 1. In GCSE English, she taught us the wrong novel for almost the entire term. We'd read this book over and over, answered essays, and remembered and studied every significant narrative meaning. Apparently, none of the faculty had such up on him until about 6 weeks before our exams, when they realized all of our work was on a book, not even on the syllabus, and all our time was effectively wasted. So to rectify it, we lost all our pay lessons, had to stay late after school 3 days a week, and spend 3 out of 5 lunch breaks cram learning the actual book with another teacher. Safe to say our class wasn't happy at all, and most parents complained as they would affect our ability to pass the exams. Story 2. Ed teacher of my high school tried to expel me for having an epileptic seizure in front of him. Said I was a danger and distraction to other pupils and was disrupting his school. I ended up being kept out of school for 2 months while my parents fought my case. In that time, almost all the rest of the team teaching staff who are furious with this decision kept me supplied with work and even one-to-one tutoring when needed. This was in a rural area where the next nearest school was 40 miles away, so he had no other school choice. My brother was finding his balance of medication while in high school and would have a seizure every so often in class. That by itself is embarrassing. Why the hell would somebody make it much more difficult for you? I'm sorry, friend. People less times. Story 3. 40-degree weather Celsius in outback Australia, and she wouldn't turn on the aircon class even though it worked. Her reason was that when she was young she didn't have an aircon and she survived. All the students hated her. Mine was the reverse. In the middle of winter, up in the Blue Mountains, she wouldn't turn on the heater in the mornings because she grew up without heated classrooms. And it's like, yeah, but you guys were allowed to wear giant effing coats, were you not? Story 4. At university, my professor did not tell us the time of our examination, despite numerous emails from 20-odd students as well as the head professor of the course. This exam could have been any time from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and I lived 90 minutes from campus and relied on crap public transportation to get to uni. It got to 9 p.m. the day before the exam. No one knew when the exam would be, and if we missed it, we would all fail the whole module. So I took the train to the city where my uni is, booked a cheap, crappy hotel for the night just to make sure I was there on time. We all took the exam at 12 p.m. after getting an email an hour before the exam was being held, so I wouldn't have made it in time if I stayed home. Worst part was that no one cared. Not the professor, not the course lead or the head of our school. They all just left 30 students in the lurch, allowing them to potentially fail the exam. And therefore the module sounds like a small university. The university I went to had a student population of around 10,000, so not huge. All our exam dates and times were published when we register for courses. This could be changed in the first 2 weeks through registrar's office, but proper notice would be required. Story 5. In my second semester of my first year of law school, everyone in my class 80+ people had to take a research class. This class was taught by 4 different law librarians but followed the same syllabus. It was also worth 1 credit. These librarians ran the class as if it was 3 credits. We had to read, conduct legal research, and write 2 memos throughout the semester. When we had 5 other classes, all within 2 to 4 credit range, plus 1 specific class was notoriously difficult. Anyway, halfway through the semester, my class gets pissed at the workload to credit ratio, and someone starts a petition to reduce the number of assignments and or change the grading for the class from a letter grade to pass or fail. Almost the entire class signs. There were a few holdouts. The student who started the petition delivers it to the librarians. The librarians removed 1 or 2 assignments, but otherwise disregard the petition. Those who signed all awkwardly suffered through the rest of the semester. Story 6. Forced us to make a donation to a charity. When I didn't bring anything in, I got on demerit. Had to argue that not everyone has the ability to give something away. She then told me off for back-chatting in front of the class. Everyone was like, WTF. Story 7. My work set me on a 3-day advanced Adobe Illustrator course last April in London. Just before the exam, the tutor said, "Oh, by the way, there may be a few questions on this exam we haven't talked about. Just do your best." What the actual F? My work just paid 1,000 euros for this. His response was that he can't be expected to teach everything. There were about 6 students in the class and we were all pretty annoyed. Story 8. She didn't believe in field trips because she said the kids would have too much fun and learning isn't supposed to be fun. However, the entire grade would take the trip, so she was required to take us. So she would make us all sit in the common area of the zoo museum, etc. And she would hold classroom lessons. It was so upsetting to hear about all the cool things the other kids got to see while we had class. The fact that I still remember things I learned on field trips compared to the countless times I was in classrooms says a lot. Sad to see some teachers think like yours. Story 9. He would act like he was enlightened and say stuff like video games, out your brain. All your free time should be spent on education as that is all that matters. But then during the lessons he would go completely off topic and start talking about random stuff. Apparently he is making a board game that could compete with chess because he is just that brilliant. Story 10. Screamed the class because he assumed that an intermittent beeping sound that occurred throughout the lecture was somebody receiving texts. It was the projector that he was using alerting him to the fact that it was overheating. Dummy. That's almost as good as the time a substitute tried to confiscate a student's phone when it beeped. It was a diabetes thing attached to the student's body. Story 11. I had a college professor who was teaching a history course to a bunch of education majors in their junior year. She would ask us questions all the time about things she hadn't yet lectured on and then pulled the really. No one knows the answer to this. Well, I guess we'll just wait for someone to answer. We were all education majors. We knew that trick. We waited out every single time. She always broke first. People that are asking, what's the trick? This was a poorly executed attempt at using the democratic method. It's better to have students arrive at an answer themselves than it is to tell them. However, you have to first create an environment of trust and respect so that the students are comfortable enough to risk a wrong answer. And you have to be willing to provide a little bit of scaffolding should no one know. This professor did neither of these things. Story 12. Our French teacher held a 5-minute detention for the entire class because we waited outside the classroom for her to let us in. You know, like polite kids do. She claimed we were wasting her time and sent a detention note home to all parents. Better still, on results day she said, well, I didn't expect you to get an A. Story 13. We were about 10 to 11 years old. It was the last period of the day, and the music teacher was subbing our science class. He was sitting on the computer, and we were all getting on with work. Towards the end of the period, our homeroom teacher comes into the classroom and exclaims, "It's the end of the day. Why are you all not packed up?" To which the music teacher replied, "I told them, and they refused to." Excuse you. He hadn't said a thing to us, so we all protested. Even so, our homeroom teacher told us off for being disobedient as the music teacher slithered out of the room and we have to stay 10 minutes late as punishment. Story 14. The class was doing a project on criminal justice and held a mock trial. My friend got assigned to play a role of an assault victim in real life. She had been a victim of an assault that was very similar to that of the character. She felt it would be too emotionally draining and tried to get out of the part. The teacher wanted an explanation, but my friend kept saying it was very personal. This went back and forth a few times over the next 2 days and it was just not clicking in the teacher's head. Finally, he lost his patience and yelled out, "You're holding up this whole project for everyone. Why the hell is it so difficult for you?" Well, the whole class paying attention, she admitted she had been assaulted the same way this character had and went to cry. They changed the topic of the project after that, but the class never really looked at the teacher the same way again. Story 15. Teachers spend weeks teaching us the Schindler method of learning about natural science instead of teaching from the book. On test day, he gave us the test that came with the teacher's version of the book, so we never even covered the info on the test. We all scored very poorly, but learned to ignore him in class and study the book on our own. Story 16. My German teacher would make you retake spelling tests until you got 100%. Once you did, you could sit and do whatever you like until the whole class got 100%. This costs a lot of pressure on everyone as he used to belittle the students who didn't pass first or the second time. If you were the only one left, he would stand over you and watch you struggle. On test day, I decided to bunk off and I got caught. I burst into tears and explained how horrible this teacher was and that I'm never going back into his class. I was moved into a higher said German class with an amazing teacher and my German improved. Story 17. This was my second year in school. My teacher, unable to manage 20 of these rowdy kids, is pretty enraged by the end of the class. She has the thing about counting every piece of equipment after class, and she begins counting the Newton meters. Now, if you don't know what these are, they are literally a metal spring with plastic around it that measures just how much an item weighs. This teacher counted 19 when they were definitely 20. So she holds us back from lunch. She brings the faculty head in and we get a bollocking from her. Cannot steal from the school. Unjust. Yada, yada, yada. If we were rowdy before, we're raging now, as she requests the least. Well-behaved kids open their bags. Of course, these kids are protesting, but the teacher offers detention if they don't comply. So after rummaging through a bunch of prepubescent kids' bags and finding nothing, She finally goes back to her desk to find a noon meter sitting behind her world's best teacher mug. Look on her face priceless. Story 18. This MUT teacher had a reputation for being a hard case and gave a lot of spontaneous tests. He played up one specific revision test, which was right before midterm or final, I think as being a really big deal where the result would reflect on where you have any potential in the subject and the usual dramatic spiel. After we did them, he went on holiday and took the test with him to correct after. Forgot to bring them back and nobody ever got their result. Another bonus, the same teacher had a double period before a double period of gym and sometimes 10 minutes before the bell goes. He'll just say, "We haven't covered enough, so instead of gym, you'll have another double MUT now." Story 19. I had one of those teachers that would just put a bunch of activities on the board and browse something on their laptops all lesson. Worst part was it was a MUT teacher. The only thing she'd do was maybe tell us to shut up once or twice, apart from one time, possibly after one of us had a word with someone about how little she did. She suddenly snapped and sent the entire class outside until we were ready to do work. We all just laughed our butts off and browsed our phones. The ones who actually cared about algebra went back in until the teacher decided to come and check on us. She just stood there. We were all completely silent until I decided to break the silence. Nice of you to join us. Oh boy. Basically, after that, we compiled a doc of what she'd been doing so we could have a talk with the dean or something about what had been going on, but not before someone accidentally shared it with the teacher. And so for the last term, she was with us. She improved. So, yeah, that's my story. Story 20. I was in the school finals of some general knowledge quiz or competition. The question I was asked was, what is the collective noun of a group of whales? I answered confidently. A pod. The illiterate bloody teacher had a school written on her answer card. Refused to listen when I assured her it was indeed a pod. Her ignorance cost me the grand title, and I was practically in tears in front of the whole school at the injustice of it. Everyone then labeled me as a bad loser. We'll never forget it. Still seize on it from time to time. It happened in 1985. Story 21. A girl in 3 of my classes was allowed by the administration to have her cell phone during classes because her father was dying. I was aware of the situation since it was happening for a week, and she often had little breakdowns. One day in the first period, her phone vibrates while the teacher is talking. He disregards the fact that she'll be allowed to have her phone and the man she handed over to him. I believe he said something along the lines of, "I'll read it, and if it's not your mother, then I'm keeping it." Her phone known for the rest of the class because it rang while I was talking. Well, the girl flips out, starts crying as soon as she sees her phone screen. She said, "No, she's leaving." This starts to stand off between the teacher and her. He ends up blocking the doorway while still demanding her phone. His logic was if he didn't know it was her mom texting her, then he can't let her leave. At this point, she's inconsolable and everyone in the class is screaming at him to let her go. If you're complex, dude, let her go, and he's screaming back, "I'm in charge here." To the point the class made so much noise that security came in to see what was going on. Security tells the girl to go to the office. Our dad did die that day, and she was in school for a month. The teacher had a leave of absence as well, and we had to sub the rest of the year. From then on, students were not allowed special circumstances for cell phones, and teachers were not allowed to block students from leaving. The real kicker was this was intro to photography, and most students were there because we had to take a mandatory elective. Story 22. The teacher told us we couldn't keep a bottle of water in our lockers because it could be vodka or something. I told her she could smell it and check. That's not my job, and that I could just use the drinking fountain. I asked her if she would use the drinking fountain instead of her mug / the tap in the teacher's lounge. She wouldn't answer. Story 23. I had to pay times, then I asked to go to the restroom. The substitute full-time teacher for another class said you don't have to pee times Z. Just sit down. After a bit more pleading and begging, I just peed my pants. I was late and totally mortified. What made it worse is that the teacher told my parents that I should have spoken up earlier and accidents happen. I still think I should have peed on her desk. Story 24. My teacher lost my finals, then made me retake them while making passive-aggressive comments about me trying to cheat. 2 weeks later, she found my original final on her desk under a pile of papers. Story 25. In the 2nd grade, our class was walking in a single file line outside for recess. It had rained and was muddy and slick. The class bully, a heavy-set, mean girl, was walking ahead of me. She slipped in the mud and fell on her. At times she jumped up and immediately pointed her finger at me. That being said, I pushed her. I got detention for a few days and had to spend that recess with my head down on a desk in the teacher's office. I swore I didn't do it, and no one believed me. Wow, that was like 1989 or 1990, and yeah, still pisses me off. Story 26. In my last year of junior school, I arrived to find everyone gossiping about my two friends and I being in trouble for some reason. We've been accused of bullying this kid. We had to apologize to him. We got called to the headmaster who blew his top. And our former teacher told us that she hoped we'd get bullied when we went to secondary school. Most of which would have been fine, but what we went to apologize. I didn't so much as even recognize him, let alone know him or bully him. He turned out to be a good guy, so at least I made a friend for the final 3 months of school. Even to this day, I can't guess how the story originated. Story 27. We had this multicultural fair in my elementary school, and the faculty wanted a Japanese kid to do origami at the Japanese station. I was the only kid that knew origami. I was and still am Filipino. So they had me pretend to be Japanese and do the paper cranes and frogs and stuff. It was just ridiculous. Story 28. Was talking to the guidance counselor about how it was ridiculous to me that a single missed assignment could drop my grade by 20 to 30 points regardless of its importance. Just because something is wrong doesn't mean you should try to change it. Why the F times? Would a guidance counselor give that type of advice to freshmen in high school? Story 29. A couple weeks until my freshman year, I transferred into a more advanced science class. On my first day in the new class, there was a quiz. I asked the teacher if I was exempt from the quiz since it was my first day. She said no. I did well, especially for not having been taught any of the material. Here's what bugged me. The final question on the test was, what country is the ticket from? Of course I got it wrong. The sentence didn't even make sense. She wouldn't give me any clarification during the test. So once it was graded, I asked when the world she meant. Turns out ticket is her pet bird. Ticket for one, capitalize the name of your pet. Also, that's not an appropriate test question. I told the teacher I had no idea it was her bird. She said, well, now that you know I'm talking about my bird, I'll give you another chance. What country is my bird from? I was stunned that she thought I was now equipped to answer this question. I wasn't in class to hear her reveal where her bird was from. I guess something like Chile, she says. Wrong. It's Africa. Africa? That's not a country. I was so mad. She also arrogantly proclaimed every so often for the first few weeks, if anyone spotted her making an error, they got an instant for the year. I can't count how many times I busted her in class, but she never stuck to her word. Last of all, some random girls I didn't even know told the teacher. I taught the bird swear words and I got in trouble for that. I never said a word, much less swear words to her bird.